Alright, so I'm making this video because, or if anybody finds this, I really don't know what I'm trying to say, and just I'm breathtaking at what I've done.
Nestled in the heart of central Virginia, Farmville has been a quiet centre of trade and education since its founding in 1798. This small town, which is situated between Richmond and Lynchburg, carries the weight of American history in its streets, from Civil War battles to the birthplace of the modern civil rights movement. First Avenue cuts through one of Farmville's most established residential neighbourhoods, a street where mature oak trees tower over modest colonial homes and well-kept Cape Cods. The houses along here tell stories of generations, families who've watched their children grow up, playing in yards bordered by white picket fences. It is the epitome of small-town America, where front porches still serve their intended purpose and neighbours wave as they pass by. The white colonial at the end of the block fit perfectly, with its traditional clapboard siding and rust-red shutters framing each window. It really could have been lifted from a postcard. The mature trees surrounding the property provided natural privacy. Multiple additions over the years had given the house character, each section telling the story of a family that had grown and adapted within its walls. But one September afternoon in 2009, it became apparent that something was wrong. A woman had been trying to reach her daughter, who had been staying over at the house. She eventually called police and asked them to do a welfare check.
Yes, I don't know who I need to talk to, or my daughter is with a family in Farmville, Virginia, and she's been basically missing for the past 2.5 days. I can't get a hold of her. Her cell phone's turned off. What's worse is the girl that she was staying with, nobody knows where she is. Her cell phone is turned off. This daughter's boyfriend is staying there, and I've talked to him several times today, and I've gotten different stories. But my husband went down. He was supposed to pick up my daughter yesterday, and he went down there. He arrived at about 11 o'clock in the morning. He sat there for 8 hours outside the house. Nobody showed up. Nobody answered the door. I mean, we're about 4 hours away here, and I don't know what else to do.
The home at 505 First Avenue in Farmville, Virginia, belonged to Debra Kelley. Inside its walls, Debra shared her life with her 16-year-old daughter, Emma. The house reflected a kind of quiet normalcy, a family that, despite change, still worked hard to remain connected. Debra and Emma's father, Mark Niederbrock, had divorced years earlier, but theirs hadn't been a bitter split. Instead, it was the rare kind of divorce that people speak of in admiration. They remained friends, often still gathering together for outings and family time with Emma. Mark was still a fixture in the house, still part of Debra's life in meaningful ways. By 2009, Mark had been serving for 6 years as pastor at Walker's Presbyterian Church in Hicksburg, a small, tight-knit congregation where bonds between church and community ran deep. He was beloved not just as a pastor, but as a friend. Reverend Jason Winokur, who knew him well, later said, "He was a very genuine servant of God. He genuinely loved his Saviour, and he genuinely loved his church." Mark's story was one of faith, but also of reinventation. Born in Illinois, he had once pursued a different path, working as a graphic designer before answering the call to ministry. His decision to enter the ministry was completely out of the blue. An Eagle Scout and a graduate of the University of Illinois, Mark's life had been built on service and creativity, and those who knew him admired his sincerity. He loved his daughter. A member of the church, Barbara Dickerson, said, "Her daddy would have done anything for her." Debra too had carved out her own impressive path. At 53 years old, she was an associate professor of sociology and criminal justice studies at Longwood University, where she had worked since 1994 after earning her doctorate from Illinois. She was respected by her colleagues and beloved by her students, known not only for her expertise, but also her warmth and willingness to listen. Their daughter Emma was a teenager straddling two worlds, one shaped by the expectations of her parents, the other by the subculture she had discovered online. After being bullied, Emma was homeschooled by her mother. She was curious, artistic, and like many teenagers, she found herself drawn into music as a form of identity. Her chosen genre was horrorcore rap, a niche, often controversial subculture of hip-hop with lyrics steeped in violence, death, and macabre storytelling. To outsiders, it was troubling, even dangerous, but to Emma, it was a community, a place where she felt understood. Through forums and social media, she found others who shared her passion. Among them was 18-year-old Melanie Wells. The two bonded quickly over the music, their friendship blossoming across state lines. Melanie's life had taken its own winding course. She was originally from Louisville in Kentucky, but her family had relocated to West Virginia just as she was about to start high school. Melanie struggled to adapt, eventually dropping out and working towards her equivalency diploma. But those who knew Melanie described her as kind and unassuming. One friend, Laura, remembered her fondly. She was one of the few who talked to me because I was a freshman. For Debra and Mark, Emma's fascination with horrorcore raised concern. The violent lyrics, the fixation on death, it all seemed so far away from the world that they had built around her. But they were also careful not to dismiss it outright. They wanted to protect their daughter, but they also wanted to support her. Their compromise was simple. Emma could go to concerts, but only if they went with her. It was a condition that Emma accepted, and one Debra summed up best when she confided to a friend. She's either going to go on her own, or I go with her and make sure she's okay. It was a balance between freedom and safety, rebellion and protection. A balance that, for the Kelleys, seemed to keep the family steady. But beneath it all was a quiet unease, the kind that lingers when parents sense their child is stepping into a world they don't fully understand. Like many teenagers of that era, Emma built an online identity through MySpace. Under the nickname Ragdoll, she shared pieces of herself with the growing online community of friends who, like her, felt most understood through music. Melanie Wells had her own profile as well, where she described herself and even listed her religion as Levian Satanist. It was a detail that seemed rebellious on the surface, but also spoke to the way that teenagers often use the internet to experiment with who they were. It was on MySpace that Emma and Melanie struck up a friendship with a young man named Richard Samuel Alden McCroskey III. Richard was 20 years old and lived across the country in Castro Valley, California. Online, though, he went by two different personas: Lil Demon Dog, his personal page, and Syko Sam, the name under which he promoted his horrorcore music. His MySpace read like a manifesto of a young man trying to both impress and reassure. Under fun facts, he wrote, "I am the Sam, a web designer, a graphic designer, a musician, a photographer, a gamer, a promoter, a juggalo. I'm not a creeper, a stalker, a rapist, a serial killer, a zombie." He described himself as a nerd, somebody whose life revolved around music. On his music page, he was more direct about his ambitions, writing, "Syko Sam is a new musician in the underground and only been rapping for a few months now." His songs bore titles such as Murderous Rage and Sick Minds Think Alike, dark, violent themes that mirrored the genre that Emma and Melanie had gravitated towards. Here's some samples of his songs.
You're ordinary. Last night I was the murderer. a voice that'll help me through. I love to hear you scream, I love to hear you cry. As I gag your mouth and I blindfold your eyes. Rape, torture, kill, you're in for a big surprise.
Over time, the online friendship between Emma and Richard turned into something more. They swapped phone numbers, talking almost every single day, sometimes for hours. For Emma, it was the rush of first love. Exciting, private, and all-consuming. It was a time before video calls, so they sent each other recorded videos.
Alright, so you wanted a video, and you made me videos, so... And he said please, so I'll make you this video, even though I'm not gonna, like, do anything. Because my room's kind of dirty, and... yeah, I don't want to show you my dirty room. But this video is for Emma, because you just told me to say your name. So... I don't know. I'll make you another video once clean, I promise. Unless you just want to, like, see my wall. Because that's not dirty. But behind me is dirty, so... that's not good. Alright, this video is for you, Emma. The ragdoll. Amazing. Amazing ragdoll. And, I really don't know what to do for you on video. So I guess I'll, like, show you my room a little bit, if that's what you want to see. First off, we got my door. And then we got my addiction for energy drinks. And then we got my small underground CD collection going on right here. And then we got my wall of awesomeness, that I call it. Lots of posters and flyers and a Hatchet Man charm and random stuff. A hatchet. Oh no, the battery's dying.
By September of 2009, their long-distance relationship was about to take a major step. On the morning of the 7th, Emma posted a message on Richard's MySpace page. Her excitement spilled across the screen. "Oh, baby, the next time you check your MySpace, you'll be at my house. I love you so, so much, baby, forever and for always." She explained that she'd been awake since 4 a.m., too restless to sleep. It was the day that they were finally going to meet in person. The plan was simple. Emma, Richard and Melanie would travel together to Southgate in Michigan for a horrorcore music festival called Strictly for the Wicked. Scheduled for the 12th of September, the all-day event promised a lineup of underground acts such as Mental Ward, Scum and Dismembered Fetus. To Emma and her friends, this wasn't just a concert, it was a pilgrimage. Richard flew in from California, and Emma arrived at the airport with her parents to meet him. She would later say that she noticed his shyness instantly, but his first thought was how pretty her smile was. Mark, ever the steady presence, thought that Richard seemed like a nice enough young man. Debra extended the kind of hospitality that came naturally to her. She allowed Richard to stay at the family home for the weekend, welcoming him as her daughter Emma's guest. Melanie's parents also agreed to let her spend the weekend at the Kelley's house, so that she could attend the festival as well. When the weekend arrived, Debra volunteered to drive the group to Michigan, with Mark deciding to tag along. Emma wasn't thrilled about her father chaperoning the trip, venting online. Talk about a long-ass drive, sharing the car with a fucking preacher. It's gonna suck, but no doubt, is it worth it? The group booked rooms at a motel near the venue. Debra with Emma and Melanie in one, Mark in another, and Richard in his own. On the night before the festival, they met up with friends from the horrorcore community, including a rapper known as Sectanic and his girlfriend, Ezekiel. The teenagers hung out, laughing and trading stories. Ezekiel even braided Melanie's hair. The next day, the festival grounds filled with roughly 250 people. The group watched performances, met friends, and immersed themselves in the aggressive theatrical energy of horrorcore. It was loud, chaotic, but alive. By the time the festival ended, the group was buzzing with the shared high of the music. Melanie logged onto her MySpace to update her friends. SFTW was fucking amazing. Back in Virginia now. Be back in West Virginia on Wednesday. I miss everyone. But Melanie, never made it back to West Virginia, and Richard never made it back to California. The next day, Richard placed a phone call. His voice was quiet, almost tentative, as he left a message for his family. I just wanted to make sure that everyone was okay. I love you guys. On the afternoon of the 18th of September, Melanie's father, Thomas Wells, was preparing to drive from West Virginia to Farmville. He'd arranged to pick up his daughter from Emma's house and bring her home. An hour before setting off, he called Melanie to let her know that he was on the way. But his call went unanswered. When Thomas arrived at 505 First Avenue, he walked up to the door and knocked. Nobody came. He tried Melanie's cell phone again and again, but it only rang. He waited outside for 7 hours, clinging to the hope that his daughter would appear, or at least call back. But as daylight slipped away, he eventually got into his car and returned home, empty-handed and unsettled. Back in West Virginia, Melanie's mother, Kathleen, became more anxious. She reached out to Emma's father, Mark. Something was wrong, she explained. Melanie wasn't answering, and neither was anybody else inside the Kelley home. Mark reassured her that he would go over and check. But hours ticked past, and he never called back. When Kathleen tried calling him directly, he too wasn't answering. With dread mounting, Melanie's parents finally called the Farmville Police Department and requested a welfare check. When officers arrived at the Kelley home, everything appeared ordinary. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the house well kept, and the lights glowing softly inside. They knocked on the front door and were surprised when it opened. Standing before them was a young man. It was Richard McCroskey. Calm and unassuming, he explained that Emma and Melanie had gone to the movies. He added that he'd already spoken with Melanie's mother and told her the same thing. The officers had no reason to doubt him. They left, noting nothing out of the ordinary.
Well, yeah, this is Farmville Police Department. Okay, did you just speak with somebody at the residence? Yes, I just spoke with, I guess, the daughter's boyfriend. Okay, well, I don't know. My sergeant went over there and he said that it was a young kid, a boy, and that Melanie and the girl she's staying with are at the movies now. Yesterday they went to Richmond. Vehicle had broken down and the cell phone's dead and that kind of thing. So is that what he talked to you about? What he told me, yeah. And like I said, but I don't know where the mother is. I don't know where. I mean, she's usually the one that I guess drives them around, and she's just disappeared. I haven't spoken to her at all. The father I talked to earlier on today,
right?
He said that he was on his way. As a matter of fact, he was on the road when I was talking to him. He was going through Farmville. He was supposed to stop at the house. I haven't heard from him since.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm at this point, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to think at all.
But by the next morning, Kathleen's fear had only sharpened. She still hadn't heard from her daughter. Melanie had never gone this long without calling, and now the silence felt suffocating. She called police again and begged them to check once more. When officers pulled up to the house for a second time, things felt different. As they approached the front door, a foul odour hung in the air. The closer they got, the stronger it became. It was the unmistakable stench of decomposition. This time, nobody came to the door. Officers forced it open and were immediately hit with the overwhelming smell, so strong it seemed to cling to their clothing and their skin. They followed the odour through the house, their boots echoing in the silence until it led them to a downstairs bedroom. The door creaked open, and inside was a scene that would stay with them forever. 3 bodies lay in the room, 1 sprawled on the bed, 2 more crumpled on the floor. They had been bludgeoned so savagely that their faces were destroyed, their skulls shattered. The victims were later identified as 16-year-old Emma, her best friend Melanie, and her father, Mark. But the horror didn't end there. Upstairs in the master bedroom, officers found Debra Kelley. Like the others, she too had been beaten to death. All of them had been bludgeoned with a maul. It left injuries so catastrophic that none of the victims could be identified visually. Dental records would be required to confirm their identities. After the gruesome discovery inside the Kelley home, detectives already had a suspect in mind, 20-year-old Richard Samuel Alden McCroskey. The condition of the three bodies revealed something chilling. They had been dead for days, decomposing in the very house where McCroskey had calmly answered the door to police and told them that Emma and Melanie had gone to the movies. But Mark wasn't as decomposed as the others. Detectives theorized he was killed when he went to check on the others. Investigators quickly noticed something else. Mark's car was missing from the driveway. It didn't take them long to track it down. In the early morning hours before the bodies were discovered, Prince Edward deputies had already received the call about a suspicious vehicle on Poor House Road. When a deputy responded, he found a car stuck in the ditch after somebody had tried to back out of a driveway. Behind the wheel was McCroskey. He didn't have a driver's license, so the officer ticketed him and arranged for the car to be towed. At the time, nobody realised the vehicle belonged to Mark, or that the young man driving it had just left behind a crime scene of unspeakable violence. In a college town like Farmville, it wasn't unusual for somebody to borrow a car. There was nothing at the time to raise any suspicion. Tow truck driver Elton Napier later recalled giving McCroskey a ride into town. He recalled, "I just asked him where he was from, and all he would say was he was from California. I said, 'What in the world are you doing down here?' He said, 'My girlfriend lives down here.'" Elton noticed that there were red marks across McCroskey's neck. They were hickeys, and Elton teased, "She was about to eat you up, wasn't she?" McCroskey grinned and said they were from his girlfriend. To Elton, he didn't seem strange, just quiet. But there was one thing he couldn't forget. He later said, "He stunk like the devil. I'm going to tell you the truth. That boy was stinking." The smell clinging to McCroskey wasn't sweat or travel. It was the stench of decomposition. He'd been living inside the Kelley home for days, surrounded by the bodies of the people he had killed. After being dropped off, McCroskey wandered into a Sheetz convenience store. A clerk remembered him saying he was waiting on a ride to the airport. That detail proved invaluable. Detectives rushed to Richmond International Airport, searching for any sign of him. They found him in a baggage claim area, stretched out on a bench, fast asleep. When officers surrounded him, McCroskey didn't resist. The arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic. Troy Bell, an airport spokesman, later described the moment. He was sitting there real calmly, almost nonchalant. In his pocket, police found a ticket to California.
We advised you of your Miranda rights. You said you understood your rights and you signed the form saying you were willing to talk to us, and you still willing to talk to us?
Yes, but I would like to have somebody here too, like a lawyer.
Okay, that is your option. So are you invoking your right to remain silent?
Yes.
The news of the quadruple murder spread through the tight-knit community like wildfire. But it didn't stop there. Within hours, the story had exploded across the internet, particularly in the niche corners where McCroskey and Emma were known figures in the horrorcore community. Despite the violent nature of the music they listened to, people who knew them were genuinely stunned. Andre Schrum, who owned Serial Killing Records, captured the shock felt by many when he said, "This is not something from the Sam I know. This is not something that I would ever in a million years envision him doing." Almost immediately, the media latched on to the horrorcore angle. Local newscasts ran segments on murder music. Headlines splashed across front pages, tied the brutal killings to the dark, violent lyrics of the genre. Reporters stood outside the crime scene, warning of the dangerous influence of songs that glorified murder. Online, McCroskey's favourite tracks were dissected line by line, with chilling meaning retroactively imposed on them. The coverage followed a familiar pattern, one that often emerges whenever tragedy collides with controversial art forms. Heavy metal was blamed for teen suicides in the 1980s, violent video games became scapegoats after school shootings. Now, horrorcore was under the microscope. But this narrative, while compelling for news cycles, fundamentally misunderstood the relationship between music and behaviour. Millions of people consume aggressive, violent music across all genres without ever harming another person. The horrorcore community itself, tight-knit and passionate, was horrified precisely because they understood the distinction between performance and reality. For most listeners, horrorcore was catharsis, not a call to arms. While the public debate raged, detectives were still focused on something more pressing: motive. McCroskey's sister, Sarah, told detectives that she had heard from friends that he and Emma had some kind of falling out at the music festival. She didn't know the details. Then detectives spoke with Curtis Gibson, a taxi driver who had given McCroskey a ride to the airport. Gibson recalled a chilling conversation. McCroskey had told him that he found a text message on Emma's phone from a man she had met at the festival, saying he loved her and wanted to be with her. When McCroskey confronted Emma, she became angry and accused him of invading her privacy. According to Gibson, McCroskey said he hadn't wanted to argue. He said he waited for her to fall asleep, and then he left the house. He just didn't tell Gibson it was after he slaughtered the entire family. On the 23rd of September, McCroskey was formally charged with 4 counts of murder. The next day, Mark was laid to rest. Friends filled the modest white church where Mark had spent so many Sundays preaching, guiding and comforting others. They described him as a man whose life was centred on God, but also as a father who had struggled to reconcile his deep faith with his daughter's fascination with macabre music and imagery. Reverend Joseph McCrutcheon spoke to the crowd, acknowledging that those gathered knew better than anybody what Mark would have said if he were alive to address such a tragedy. Mark, he reminded them, was the one who had spent his life in service to others, visiting their homes, sitting at their bedsides during illness, and presiding over funerals when they said goodbye to their loved ones. After the service concluded, Mark was buried on the quiet grounds in front of the church he had faithfully served for years. The following week, services were held for Debra Kelley and her daughter Emma. Farmville United Methodist Church was filled with mourners, many of whom knew Debra not only as a colleague, but as a teacher and mentor who had left an enduring impact. Reverend Sylvia Meadows delivered words of comfort, telling those in attendance, "In the face of horror and tragedy, we're claiming that God is stronger." She spoke of Debra as a tough yet compassionate educator who devoted her professional life to understanding criminals and victims alike, often challenging her students to see the human story behind the crime. Emma was remembered in a more complicated light, as a teenager who had a rebellious streak and an interest in the occult, but who also retained the simple joys of adolescence, like her love for the Backstreet Boys. Reverend Meadows reminded mourners that grief and remembrance often involve embracing both sides of a person, the struggles and the joys. She told them, "We can no longer live as though certain groups don't exist. We can no longer pretend that darkness and forces of evil aren't right under our noses." Melanie was laid to rest in a private service at Brown Funeral Home's South Berkeley Chapel. As the grief lingered over Farmville, the legal proceedings moved forward. In November, McCroskey was indicted on 6 counts of capital murder as well as a charge of grand larceny. In Virginia, capital murder is not a single defined crime, but a category of offences that can warrant the death penalty. A person can be charged with capital murder for acts tied to terrorism, for killing a law enforcement officer, or, as in McCroskey's case, for committing multiple murders within a 3-year period. Early the next year, McCroskey's defence attorney, Carrie Bowen, filed a motion requesting a change of venue, citing the intense publicity surrounding the case in Farmville. He also requested that McCroskey undergo a mental evaluation, hoping to determine whether psychological factors could play a role in the defence. Meanwhile, speculation grew over whether prosecutors would seek the death penalty. Among those who followed the case closely were people who believed that seeking McCroskey's execution wouldn't serve justice. Jessica Hinds, a former student of Debra's, and her husband, Scott, launched an online petition urging prosecutors not to seek the death penalty. Jessica explained their reasoning, stating, "My husband and I both have this overwhelming feeling that Debra wouldn't want her murderer to be put to death." She remembered Debra's extraordinary empathy and her ability to recognise that people aren't defined by a single act. She said, "We wanted people to understand that we're not just one thing or act, that we are all products of a myriad of circumstances and our social environment." Such pleas from victims' loved ones can sometimes influence prosecutorial decisions. But in this case, none of Debra or Mark's family members signed the petition. Support did come from an unexpected source, McCroskey's own sister, Sarah. In a statement, she expressed her own conflicted feelings, stating, "I feel really, really bad for what happened to the family, whether my brother did it or not. But I think that this is something we can do for her family. If he's guilty, then I think giving him the death penalty is the easy way out, and he should suffer the consequences for what he did." On the 19th of September 2010, Richard McCroskey was escorted into the courtroom. He stood before the judge and quietly entered guilty pleas to 2 counts of capital murder and 2 counts of first-degree murder. The decision came as part of a plea agreement in which prosecutors agreed to take the death penalty off the table in exchange for McCroskey accepting a life sentence. His defence attorney, Carrie Bowen, explained that the overwhelming evidence left little room for manoeuvre. He remarked, "4 bodies are pretty compelling evidence. This is the kind of stuff that citizens any place in this country are terrified it could happen to them. This is the kind of case death penalties arise from." McCroskey himself declined to make any statement in court, though his attorney said that he was preparing a message for the victims' families. Bowen described his client's mood as sombre and subdued, stating, "There are 4 people dead here. He's not happy at all." Prosecutor James Ennis then outlined some of the grisly details that investigators had pieced together. In the early hours of the 15th of September, McCroskey had been drinking beer, smoking marijuana, and taking painkillers before launching his attack around 3 a.m. Armed with a heavy maul, he moved methodically through the home while the occupants slept. Melanie Wells was the first to be targeted, as she slept on a sofa in a downstairs den. McCroskey then crept upstairs and bludgeoned Debra Kelley in her bed. Afterwards, he returned downstairs, entered Emma's bedroom, and struck her repeatedly as she slept. According to Ennis, none of the 3 stirred during the attacks, and the absence of defensive wounds suggested they had never awoken. Later that morning, Mark, Emma's father, arrived at the house after being asked by Melanie's parents to check on the teenagers. McCroskey confronted him in the living room and killed him as well. Afterwards, he dragged both Melanie and Mark's bodies into Emma's bedroom, leaving all 3 victims together. In the days that followed, McCroskey remained inside the house, coexisting with the 4 bodies as they began to decompose. He even recorded a video of himself with a digital camera, acknowledging what he had done, confessing that he knew he would have to face justice, and expressing thoughts of suicide.
Alright, so I'm making this video because, or if anybody finds this, I really don't know what I'm trying to say, and I'm breathtaking at what I've done, and I apologize. I know I'm gonna pay for my consequences. I wish that I could have not done this, but I just lost my mind. I snapped, and I did what I did, and I gotta pay for it now, my consequences. I'm all shaky and stuff, but to anybody that finds this, tell my parents that I love them, and I'm very sorry for doing this, and there's nothing really else to say. To everybody that is probably gonna hate me for this, I'm sorry, and I had to do it. My mind just snapped. I couldn't control it anymore. That's it. Fuck you to the big world. Fuck everybody in the world. I can't stand this place.
When asked about a possible motive, Ennis refused to speculate. He said, "He's a very closed individual." Bowen, however, provided some insight, suggesting that McCroskey's anger had been fueled by his turbulent relationship with Emma. McCroskey had believed that they were in an exclusive relationship, while Emma appeared to see things differently. According to some sources, Emma wasn't as attracted to McCroskey when she met him in person. He apparently didn't look like his MySpace pictures. According to Ezekiel, Emma texted her and said that she was uncomfortable. She found McCroskey to be immature. After discovering messages on her phone that suggested she had been speaking to others, McCroskey's jealousy and rage reached a breaking point. There was also questions raised about whether his violent interest in music had played any role in the killings. Bowen acknowledged the dark themes present in much of McCroskey's preferred genre, but was careful not to draw a direct connection. He stated, "Much of that music is so rampant with this exact kind of behaviour, you can't help but notice the coincidence. But I don't have a sense the music led to this kind of behaviour." Well, that is it for this episode of Morbidology. As always, thank you so much for listening, and I'd like to say a massive thank you to my newest supporters up on Patreon, Lisa and Holly. In exchange for your support up on Patreon, I upload ad-free and early release episodes, as well as bonus episodes of Morbidology Plus, and behind the scenes, which includes bonus video, audio and case files. You can join for as little as $1 a month, and there's absolutely no obligations. You can also sign up to Morbidology on Apple subscriptions, where I upload ad-free and early release episodes as well as bonus episodes of Morbidology Plus. Remember to check us out at morbidology.com for more information about this episode and to read some true crime articles. Until next time, take care of yourselves, stay safe, and have an amazing week.